At my father's will, reading the polished mahogany table gleamed under the chandelier, but the air was thick with hostility. Olivia Bennett, 29 years old, walked into the room alone. My navy blue blazer pressed to perfection, my heart pounding like a war drum. My brother Michael, smug in his designer suit, lounged in his chair like a king waiting for his crown. Beside him sat my mother, Patricia, her lips curved in that familiar thin smile that always told me I was tolerated but never embraced. The lawyer, Richard Cole, shuffled the papers, his voice calm, but before he could begin, Michael laughed a sharp sound that sliced through the silence. "She only types on her laptop," he sneered, gesturing at me as if I were a joke, not a real businesswoman, not someone who belongs at this table. My mother nodded, eyes glinting with pride for her son, while her gaze on me carried the weight of dismissal I had known my whole life. The relatives in the back chuckled softly, their whispers like knives digging into my skin. I sat frozen, my palms damp, but inside me, something hardened, something unbreakable. I thought of the nights I wired money home, the times I swallowed my pride to keep their lights on, only to be erased, diminished, ridiculed. Now here I was again, humiliated before the family painted as the daughter who never mattered, the girl who played with gadgets. Richard cleared his throat, but Michael kept going, his voice booming with arrogance. "Dad built Bennett Holdings for me. Everyone knows it. Olivia should be grateful if I let her stay in the house. She has no place here." Patricia reached over, patting his hand, her voice smooth with cruelty disguised as maternal care. "Your brother knows business, Olivia. You should learn to accept your place." The words stung not because they were new, but because they were the echo of a lifetime. The humiliation pressed down like a weight, the room closing in on me, their laughter echoing in my ears. Each chuckle a reminder that to them I was invisible, irrelevant. My chest tightened rage, simmering under the surface. But I bit my tongue, my silence a weapon sharper than any retort. I wanted to scream to tell them that they knew nothing about me, but I stayed still, watching, waiting, the fury inside me building. I remembered my father's rare moments of recognition, the glint in his eye when he once asked about my projects, the whisper of hope that maybe, just maybe, he had seen me for who I was. The lawyer's hand trembled slightly as he shuffled the papers, aware of the storm brewing in the room. My eyes locked on Michael, his smirk daring me to rise to fight to prove him wrong, but I stayed rooted, letting his arrogance dig his own grave. The betrayal was sharp, the sting immediate, but beneath it was a pulse, a steady rhythm of defiance. They thought I was beaten, humiliated, but little did they know the power in that room was shifting, and I was about to take it all. Growing up in the Bennett household was like living under a hierarchy carved in stone, with Michael at the top, crowned heir from birth, and me at the bottom, a shadow that barely registered. My father, Edward Bennett, was a real estate mogul, stern, commanding a man whose voice carried more authority than law itself. From the moment Michael could walk, he was told he was destined to inherit the empire, while I was told to keep out of the way. Patricia, my mother, reinforced this dynamic at every turn, praising Michael's every mediocre achievement while dismissing mine as trivial. When I got straight A's in school, she said, "Grades don't build empires, Olivia. Your brother was born to lead." When Michael scored a single goal in a high school soccer game, the whole family threw a party. The imbalance was suffocating, and I learned early that my value was invisible inside my own home. I remember sitting at the dinner table at 15, nervously explaining my fascination with coding, how I had built a simple website for a school project. Michael scoffed. "That's not real work. Real work is buying property, making deals, being like Dad." My father chuckled, not cruelly but dismissively, and the conversation ended there. Swallowed by Michael's laughter. It was the first time I understood what less than really meant. At 18, I earned a scholarship to study computer science at the University of Texas. No one came to the award ceremony. Michael was starting his internship at Bennett Holdings, and the family chose to celebrate him instead. I packed my bags alone, stepping onto that campus with nothing but ambition and the bitter taste of neglect. While other students partied, I worked 2 part-time jobs cleaning offices at night and coding freelance projects to cover what the scholarship didn't. During those years, I still sent money home. When my parents called, it was never to ask how I was, but to remind me of overdue credit card bills or rising utility costs. I wired what I could, sometimes skipping meals, sometimes pulling all-nighters to deliver projects on time. They never once said thank you. They never once acknowledged that I was keeping their lights on while Michael flaunted a new car bought with Dad's money. Patricia would tell me over the phone, "You should be grateful your brother keeps the family's name shining." I wanted to scream that I was the one quietly holding everything together, but I swallowed the words, storing the pain deep inside. There was always that flicker of hope that someday, if I worked hard enough, they would see me, respect me, maybe even love me. But hope, I learned, can be the cruelest weapon. Each holiday break I came home, Michael sat at the head of the table, boasting about deals he had not truly closed, while I sat at the far end, barely part of the conversation. If I mentioned my work, the apps I built, the code I wrote, Michael rolled his eyes and Patricia waved a dismissive hand. "That's nice, dear," she would say, "but computers won't put roofs over heads. Leave the real work to your brother." It was a chorus I grew up with, a melody of contempt that hummed beneath every interaction. The sacrifice of my youth was invisible, my worth reduced to nothing more than background noise. Yet within me the defiance grew hard and unyielding. They had no idea the girl they dismissed was shaping something bigger than their entire empire, a force that would one day eclipse everything they thought mattered. The tension in the room was suffocating as Richard Cole adjusted his glasses and began reading the first lines of my father's will. The words carried weight, his voice steady, formal as he detailed the assets under Bennett Holdings, the sprawling real estate empire my father had built brick by brick. Michael leaned back in his chair. Arms crossed, a smug grin etched across his face as if the words were already written in his favor. "Dad built Bennett Holdings for me," he interrupted, his voice booming over Richard's measured tone. "Everyone here knows it. Olivia doesn't belong in this conversation." My heart thudded painfully, but I stayed silent, refusing to give him the satisfaction of a reaction. Patricia reached over and patted his arm, her voice syrupy, dripping with condescension. "Your brother knows business, Olivia. Be grateful if Michael lets you stay in the house." The room murmured with agreement, a chorus of approval for the golden boy of the Bennett family. Their eyes slid over me as if I were an intruder in my own father's legacy, a ghost haunting a place I was never supposed to touch. Richard cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable with Michael's interruption, but pressed on, naming properties, bank accounts, and shares, all while Michael tapped his pen against the table, his arrogance growing with every sentence. He leaned forward, looking directly at me, his eyes sharp with contempt. "You should really leave this to the people who understand business, Olivia. Coding is cute, but empires are built on land, not lines of code." His words were venom designed to humiliate, and I could feel the laughter ripple through the room, faint chuckles that sliced at my composure. Patricia nodded approvingly, her smile tight, as if every insult from Michael was a truth she had been waiting to deliver through him. My fingers curled into fists in my lap, nails digging into my skin, but outwardly I remained still, my face a mask. Inside, though, the fire roared hotter, every cruel word fueling a defiance that had been forged over years of being overlooked, dismissed, erased. I thought of the nights I had spent coding until dawn, the sacrifices I had made, the debts I had paid, all while Michael basked in undeserved glory. He thought I was weak, that silence meant surrender, but silence was my shield, my strategy, the armor that kept me from exploding too soon. Richard paused, his gaze flicking to me, perhaps sensing the storm beneath my calm exterior. I met his eyes briefly, a silent promise that I was not beaten. Not yet. Michael chuckled, misinterpreting my composure as defeat, and leaned closer, his voice dropping to a sneer only I could hear. "Don't embarrass yourself, Olivia. You'll never be more than the girl who tinkers with computers while real leaders like me run the world." I wanted to laugh in his face, to show him the empire I had built while he drowned in debt and delusion, but it wasn't time yet. Instead, I met his gaze, steady and unblinking, letting him see a flicker of something he couldn't quite name strength. He smirked, but unease flickered across his features for the briefest moment before he masked it with arrogance again. Patricia's voice broke the silence. "Your father trusted Michael with this family's legacy. Don't disgrace his memory by pretending otherwise." The cruelty was precise surgical, and it hit the old wound that had never fully healed. I stayed silent because silence was no longer weakness. It was power. I was letting them build their tower of arrogance higher and higher, waiting for the perfect moment to knock it down. Michael suddenly pushed his chair back and rose to his feet, his shadow stretching across the polished table as though he were already the crowned king of my father's empire. His voice grew louder, dripping with contempt calculated to humiliate me in front of everyone gathered. "What does Olivia even own?" he asked, mockingly, his laughter booming around the room. "A second-hand laptop. A dingy apartment. Maybe a cubicle in some rented office space. That's not business. That's a hobby." The room erupted in chuckles, the kind that sting more than screams, soft and sharp, a chorus of dismissal. Patricia's lips curled into a smile of approval, her eyes locking on mine with a cold satisfaction, as if she had waited years to see me cut down in this very moment. A cousin in the corner whispered something, and the ripple of laughter spread again, heavier this time, pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. I sat perfectly still, my chest burning, every nerve screaming to react, to fight back. But I forced myself into silence because I knew my words now would be wasted against their jeers. My mind flashed back to nights when my phone buzzed with Patricia's calls, her voice urgent, demanding money for overdue bills. I remembered transferring the last $500 from my account, skipping rent, eating instant noodles for weeks, so they could keep their lights on so Michael could continue strutting around with his new suit and smug grin. None of that mattered now, not to them. In their eyes, I was still the invisible daughter, the girl who didn't belong, the one who should be grateful for scraps. Michael leaned forward, his palms flat on the table, his smirk-wide eyes gleaming with arrogance. "Dad built Bennett Holdings for me. Olivia has no right to even sit at this table, let alone expect anything from it. She should be grateful if I let her park her laptop in a corner of the office." The words stung, but more than that, they enraged. Patricia's voice cut through next smooth, venomous. "Your brother speaks the truth, Olivia. He has the vision, the strength, the leadership. You should know your place by now." The humiliation was complete. Their words stripped me bare, leaving me exposed before relatives and witnesses, each face reflecting judgment, pity, or worse, amusement. I thought of the day I skipped my graduation ceremony because Patricia said attending Michael's real estate awards dinner was more important. I remembered how she looked me in the eye and said, "Degrees don't pay bills, but Michael's deals do." And yet I had been the one paying the bills. I remembered wiring money to cover property taxes when Michael's deals fell through, only for Patricia to thank him instead, calling him the backbone of the family. Every sacrifice I made had been stolen, rebranded as Michael's contribution, while I remained the forgotten donor, the silent ghost that held up the house without ever being acknowledged. My fists tightened in my lap, nails cutting into my skin, a physical reminder to stay calm, to let them revel in their cruelty for just a moment longer. Their laughter filled the room again, bouncing off the high ceilings, but I forced myself to lift my head to look straight at Michael. His eyes danced with mockery, convinced of his supremacy, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath my calm surface. I swallowed the humiliation whole, letting it burn like acid in my chest, knowing that soon, very soon, that same laughter would choke in their throats. Richard Cole cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the waves of laughter as he lifted another sheet of paper from the stack. "To my daughter, Olivia Bennett." The room stilled, the words hanging in the air like a fragile promise, and for the first time since I had entered that suffocating chamber, my breath caught in my chest. My heart hammered hope, clawing its way up through the years of dismissal and scorn. Maybe, just maybe, my father had seen me after all. Maybe the nights I spent studying by dim light, the sacrifices, the quiet deposits into their accounts, the resilience I had built brick by brick, maybe it had meant something to him. The room's atmosphere shifted, curious eyes turned toward me, and for a flicker of a second I felt a sliver of recognition, as if the walls that had always closed me in might finally break. I sat straighter, my palms damp but steady, holding on to that fragile thread of hope like a lifeline. Michael, however, broke the silence with a loud, derisive laugh that shattered it into pieces. Probably Dad's old typewriter, he jeered, his grin stretching wide as the others joined in. Perfect for your little coding hobbies, Olivia. The laughter rolled over me in waves, drowning the fragile flame that had dared to flicker in my chest. Patricia chuckled softly, her eyes locked on me with pity that stung more than cruelty. Don't take it the wrong way, dear. Your father always wanted you to feel included in some small way. The implication was sharp, as if whatever token might be mentioned would be more charity than recognition, a pat on the head for the forgotten child. The heat rushed to my face, humiliation crawling across my skin, but deeper still was the ache of betrayal, sharper, because of the moment of hope that had come before it. For a breath, I had believed that Edward Bennett, the man who raised me in silence, might have left me something of substance, a sign that he had seen me, valued me, trusted me. And then, just as quickly, that fragile belief was crushed under Michael's laughter and Patricia's cold approval. The memory of every other false hope flooded back every time my achievements had been ignored, every time Michael's mediocrity had been celebrated, every time I thought I might finally be enough, only to be shoved back into the shadows. My chest tightened, the room blurred, but I forced myself to blink, to refocus, to let the pain harden instead of destroy me. They thought the moment was theirs, that I had been given a crumb only to have it mocked and dismissed. But what they didn't know was that hidden in the pages still unread lay the storm that would shatter their illusion of superiority forever. Richard Cole paused, his fingers tightening on the folder, as if even he could feel the weight of the moment that was about to fall. The laughter around the table slowly subsided as he reached for a separate sealed envelope, thick and worn at the edges, clearly distinct from the rest of the official will. He looked at Patricia first, then at Michael, before his eyes landed on me with a flicker of something I could not yet name respect, maybe even anticipation. Edward Bennett left an additional trust. Richard announced, his voice calm, but cutting through the air like a blade. This was to be disclosed only after his passing and only under very specific instructions. Michael's smirk faltered, his brows knitting in confusion, and Patricia straightened in her chair, her painted nails clinking against the table as she gripped the edge. I felt the blood rush in my ears as Richard slit the envelope and pulled out a stack of documents bound together with a gold clip. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. 6 years ago, Edward Bennett invested $1 million into a company registered under the name Novatech Systems, founded by his daughter, Olivia Bennett. The silence was deafening, a vacuum that seemed to swallow the air from the room. Michael's face went pale, his jaw slack, then twisted into incredulous fury. What company? He barked, his voice breaking through the stillness like shattered glass. What the hell is Novatech? Patricia's lips parted, her breath sharp, her eyes darting to me as if seeing me for the first time, though her gaze carried more suspicion than recognition. My heart thudded hard, but my face remained still, years of silence now serving as my armor. Richard continued, his tone unwavering. According to Edward's signed agreement, he provided early-stage capital to Novatech Systems in exchange for a minority stake, with the remainder held solely by Olivia Bennett. The trust specifies that any profits, shares, or valuation tied to this company remain under her direct control. A murmur spread among the relatives, their whispers electric, a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. Michael slammed his hand on the table, rattling glasses and startling even Patricia. This is absurd. Dad would never throw money away on her childish projects. His eyes darted to me sharp with venom. Tell them, Olivia. Tell them this is some mistake. You didn't have the brains to start a company. You barely made it through college without loans. Patricia's voice trembled not with emotion, but with indignation. Richard, there must be some error. Edward never mentioned this to me. He would not risk family money on computers. Her tone dripped with disdain at the word, as though technology were a disease. Richard, however, raised his hand firmly. I assure you, Patricia, these are Edward's documents, signed, notarized, and legally binding. There is no mistake. He slid the stack of papers across the table toward me, the weight of them thudding softly against the wood. I reached out my hand, steady, my fingers brushing over the familiar crest of my company embossed on the header. For 6 years I had built Novatech in silence, pouring every ounce of my being into its growth, its innovations, its relentless rise. My father had seen something no one else had, and in secret he had given me the seed to grow what would one day eclipse his empire. The room buzzed with tension, relatives leaning in their expressions split between disbelief and awe. Michael's face reddened, his composure cracking, his voice dripping with desperation. "This is some trick. She's lying, forging papers, trying to steal what belongs to me." Richard's voice hardened steel behind every word. Edward Bennett was clear. These are his instructions, his investments, his trust. And Olivia Bennett is the rightful beneficiary. I sat back, the documents in my hands, the eyes of the room locked on me, and for the first time, the silence was not humiliating. It was power thick and palpable, the kind of silence that comes before a storm that will tear everything apart. The silence that followed Richard's words stretched unbearably, every breath in the room caught as though the very air had turned to glass. I stood slowly, pushing my chair back with deliberate calm, my hands steady on the stack of documents that now carried the weight of a lifetime. My voice rang out clear, cutting through the tension like steel through silk. The company you all mocked, the work you laughed at, the so-called hobby that was never worth your respect, today it is valued at $1.8 billion. Novatech Systems is not a dream. It is real. It is thriving. And I am its CEO and majority shareholder. Gasps rippled across the room, sharp and audible. Michael's face twisted, first pale with disbelief, then flushed with rage. "That's impossible," he shouted, his words cracking under the weight of fury. "She's lying, making up numbers, pretending to be something she's not. Dad would never put real money into this nonsense." Patricia leaned forward, her manicured fingers clutching the edge of the table, her eyes darting between me and Richard as if searching for an escape. "Olivia, stop this charade. You've embarrassed this family enough. Technology companies collapse every day. Don't humiliate your father's memory with this fantasy." I met her gaze, unflinching, every scar from her years of disdain now fueling my fire. "This is not fantasy, Mother. This is fact. And the world already knows it, even if you don't." As if on cue, the doors to the room opened, and Daniel Ross, my personal attorney, strode in, a laptop in one hand and a sleek portfolio in the other. His presence was electric, his confidence radiating as he placed the laptop on the table and connected it to the projector mounted above. "Ladies and gentlemen," Daniel began, his voice calm but commanding, "allow me to present the most recent valuation report of Novatech Systems as filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission." The screen flickered to life, displaying graphs, charts, and headlines from major financial outlets. Bold letters spelled out what Michael had just tried to deny. Novatech Systems valued at $1.8 billion in Series D funding. Michael's mouth opened, but no words came. His eyes darted desperately from the screen to the papers, to Richard and back to me, as though the truth could somehow be undone if he refused to accept it. Patricia's face drained of color, her lips trembling as the whispers around the room grew louder, cousins and relatives exchanging looks of shock and awe. Daniel clicked through slides, each one a nail in the coffin of their disbelief. Partnerships with Fortune 500 companies. Patents filed under my name, recognition from industry leaders. "Your father saw potential in Olivia's vision?" Daniel continued, his tone sharp now, a deliberate strike at the arrogance in the room. "He invested early, not out of charity, but because he understood innovation. And today, her company eclipses the value of Bennett Holdings by a margin too vast to ignore." I took a step closer to Michael. My eyes locked on his, my voice steady but carrying the weight of years of swallowed silence. "You laughed at my job. You mocked me for typing on a laptop. And yet every keystroke built an empire larger than anything you have ever touched. You sat on Dad's coattails while I built something from nothing." Michael shook his head violently, his fists clenching, his voice hoarse. "This is a trick. It has to be. You don't have what it takes." Richard interjected firmly. "The documentation is valid, the valuation is recognized, and Edward Bennett's trust affirms Olivia's ownership. There is no trick here." The room erupted in low voices, some relatives looking at me with newfound respect, others staring at Michael with thinly veiled contempt. Patricia finally whispered, her voice broken. "Edward, he never told me." I looked at her, my heart hard but resolute. Maybe he knew you would never believe in me. Maybe he wanted me to have one thing you couldn't take away. The weight of truth crashed over them, undeniable and final. Michael's power, Patricia's arrogance, the family's laughter, all of it dissolved under the blazing reality that the daughter they had dismissed as worthless had built a billion-dollar empire that dwarfed them all. And for the first time, they were the ones left speechless, stripped bare by the truth they had refused to see. The murmurs in the room were growing louder, the weight of the revelation pressing down like a storm cloud ready to break. Michael's face was crimson, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles whitened, his chest heaving with the effort of trying to hold on to the illusion of control. I stepped closer, my heels striking the polished floor with deliberate authority, my eyes locked on his. "You laughed at my job, Michael," I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through the chaos. "You mocked me for typing on a laptop for building something you couldn't understand. But while you were wasting Dad's money on failed deals and flashy suits, I was building an empire from nothing." His mouth opened ready to spit another denial, but I raised my hand, silencing him. And speaking of money, I continued sliding a folder across the table. "Let's talk about yours." Daniel Ross leaned forward, opening the file to reveal bank statements, foreclosure notices, and official letters stamped with the crest of the Internal Revenue Service. The color drained from Michael's face as Daniel read aloud. Michael Bennett currently holds outstanding debts of over $2 million. Several properties under Bennett Holdings are mortgaged to cover personal expenses. And most damning of all, there is an active investigation into tax evasion tied to shell companies he registered overseas. The room fell silent, the whispers choking off into stunned stillness. Patricia's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Michael, is this true?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He shook his head violently, stammering. "No, this is fabricated. She planted this. She's trying to destroy me." Richard Cole, who had remained measured and neutral all day, finally spoke with cold authority. "These are official documents, Michael. Your father was aware of this before his passing, and it is precisely why he created the additional trust in Olivia's favor. He did not trust you with the empire he built." Michael staggered back, his legs buckling as though the ground beneath him had vanished. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice breaking with rage. "You planned this. You waited for him to die so you could swoop in and steal everything from me." I stood taller, every ounce of humiliation I had swallowed, now reshaped into fire. I didn't have to plan anything. You destroyed yourself with greed, with arrogance, with the belief that the world owed you because of your last name. Dad saw through you in the end. He gave me the seed money because he knew I would build something that lasted. And I did. Patricia's eyes darted wildly between us, desperation lacing her words. "Olivia, please, you can't mean to take everything from your brother. He is still family." My gaze hardened, a steel resolve in every syllable. Family doesn't mock you at your lowest. Family doesn't steal from the people who sacrificed everything. Family doesn't bury you under their arrogance and laugh while you bleed. Michael made his choice. And so did Dad. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the sound of Michael's labored breathing. His mask of superiority had shattered, replaced by raw fear and fury, and for the first time in my life, I saw him not as the golden boy of the Bennetts, but as a desperate man stripped bare by the truth. The power he had wielded so carelessly now hung in the air around me, and everyone in that room knew the balance had shifted for good. Richard Cole straightened his back, his voice regaining the solemn weight of authority as he lifted the final set of documents from the folder. The room, still humming with the aftershock of Michael's exposed debts, quieted as every eye followed his movements. He cleared his throat and read with deliberate precision. "By the authority of this will and trust, Edward Bennett has appointed his daughter Olivia Bennett as executor of his estate, with full control over 60% of Bennett Holdings and the discretion to manage, sell, or restructure as she deems appropriate." The words struck like thunder, reverberating through the chamber. My breath caught for a fraction of a second, but I held my composure, my face calm, as the storm inside me surged with vindication. Michael slammed his fist against the table, his voice cracking with rage. This is outrageous. I am the son. I am the rightful heir. He built this empire for me, not her." His voice grew louder, but there was desperation in every syllable, the unraveling of a man watching his kingdom slip through his fingers. Patricia leaned toward Richard, her tone sharp and demanding. There must be a mistake. Edward would never bypass his own son for his daughter. He must have been coerced, confused, misled. Daniel Ross stood, his voice cool and unwavering. There is no mistake. The documents are clear, notarized, and witnessed. Edward Bennett knew exactly what he was doing. This decision was deliberate. He chose Olivia because he believed in her capability, and because Michael's record speaks for itself. Reckless, irresponsible, and under federal investigation. A hush swept across the room, relatives shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided Michael's eyes, others stared openly at me with a mixture of shock and newfound respect. For once, I was not invisible. For once, the silence that followed my name was not dismissal, but recognition. Michael's face contorted with fury, his body trembling as he pointed at me. She tricked him. She filled his head with lies. She doesn't deserve any of this. Richard's voice cut through his protest like a judge delivering a final verdict. Edward Bennett's decision is legally binding. Olivia Bennett is executor. Your objections have no merit. The weight of the statement settled like iron on Michael's shoulders, crushing the last remnants of his bravado. He slumped back into his chair, his chest heaving, eyes darting wildly as if searching for an ally, but finding none. Patricia reached for his hand, but he pulled away, consumed by humiliation. I rose to my feet, the room's gaze heavy on me, but this time it did not suffocate. It empowered. For years, you told me I didn't belong. I said, my voice steady, carrying across every corner of the room. You mocked me, dismissed me, and erased my sacrifices. But Dad saw me. He believed in me when none of you did. And now, by his will and the law, I am the one entrusted with his legacy. My words echoed in the stillness, and I let them linger. Let the truth sink deep into the cracks of their disbelief. Michael muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Patricia's eyes glistened, but not with pride or love, only with fear of losing the golden sun she had built her life around. Richard placed the signed declaration in front of me, his voice formal, but tinged with respect. Executor Olivia Bennett, the estate is yours to manage. I picked up the pen, my hand steady, and signed my name with deliberate strokes, each letter sealing not just the legal power I now held, but the reclamation of the worth they had denied me all my life. When I set the pen down, the sound was final, like a gavel striking. Justice had been served. The silence after my signature was deafening, a final blow that left Michael gasping for air like a boxer who had taken one hit too many. His face was drained of the arrogance that had defined him for decades, replaced by the pallor of a man stripped bare in front of his kingdom. Richard gathered the papers calmly, his movements methodical, while Daniel Ross closed his portfolio with a snap that sounded like the end of an era. Michael suddenly lurched forward, slamming his palms against the table, his voice hoarse and broken. "This isn't over. I'll fight this in court. I'll expose her lies. His rant was cut short by Richard's cool voice. "Michael, you cannot fight the truth. There is already an active investigation into your financial dealings. Every word you speak here only worsens your position." The whispers began again, but this time they were no longer about me. Cousins who once laughed now exchanged uneasy glances at Michael, their expressions shifting from admiration to disdain. The golden boy of the Bennett family was unraveling before their eyes. Patricia reached out, grabbing Michael's hand, her voice trembling as desperation cracked through her composure. "Olivia, please," she begged, her eyes locking on mine with something that looked almost like fear. "Keep the house for your brother. At least let him stay in the family home. He has nowhere else to go." Her plea was thin, her voice shaking, but her words were heavy with the entitlement that had poisoned our family for years. I looked at her and then at Michael, his eyes darting wide with panic, a man who had mocked me minutes before, now drowning in his own downfall. He can keep what he earns legally. I said, my tone sharp and cold, but nothing more. Dad trusted me, not him, and I will not betray that trust by rescuing him from the consequences of his own greed. Patricia gasped, pulling her hand back as if my words had burned her. Michael's shoulders slumped, his fists unclenched, and he sank back into his chair like a deflated balloon, his eyes glassy, his jaw slack. The room that once cheered for him now stared in silence, no one moving to defend him, no one offering comfort. His downfall was complete, not with a dramatic crash, but with the quiet devastation of a man stripped of power, exposed, humiliated, and left to face justice alone. The golden image of the perfect son was shattered, and all that remained was the hollow shell of entitlement and failure. I rose to my feet, the weight of the room pressing in, but this time I carried it with ease, no longer the daughter dismissed and belittled, but the woman who had proven her worth beyond question. Michael sat slumped in silence, Patricia staring at him with hollow eyes, their empire of arrogance reduced to dust. But I knew this story could not end simply with their downfall. It had to be about what came next, about transforming pain into purpose. I turned toward the relatives gathered, some still reeling, others already whispering about the shift they had just witnessed. This legacy will not be wasted, I began, my voice steady, deliberate, and resolute. I will honor my father not by hoarding wealth, but by creating something that lasts beyond us, something that gives others the chances I was nearly denied. I paused, letting the words hang in the stillness before continuing. With a portion of my inheritance and the profits of Novatech Systems, I will establish the Bennett Foundation for Women in Technology. It will provide scholarships, mentorship, and resources for young women who are told they don't belong in boardrooms or labs, who are laughed at the way I was laughed at. They will know they are not alone, and they will never again be silenced by arrogance disguised as tradition. A ripple moved through the room, the shift in tone undeniable. Whispers gave way to murmurs of approval, aunts nodding, cousins exchanging thoughtful glances. Even those who had mocked me now forced to recognize something larger than themselves unfolding. Patricia's lips parted, her voice faint. "Olivia, you would do this?" After everything I met her gaze unflinching. "Yes, because I will not let your cruelty define me. I will not let Michael's arrogance dictate my story. I choose to create something better, something worthy of the name Bennett, something Dad would have been proud of." Daniel Ross nodded approvingly beside me, his voice cutting in. "This is how legacies are written, not in greed or deception, but in vision and action." Richard added with rare warmth. "Edward would have wanted this." "He believed in you, Olivia. Today proves he was right." I let their words settle, then straightened my shoulders, drawing a clear line in the sand. My boundaries stand firm. I will not be your safety net, Michael. I will not be your shield mother. But I will honor the values Dad instilled in me, the ones you tried to erase. From this day forward, I live not in your shadow, but in my own light. For the first time in my life, the silence that followed was not dismissal, but respect. Heads bowed slightly, relatives rose to leave, some offering quiet congratulations, others too stunned to speak. The shift was complete. The balance of power had changed forever. As the last of the relatives filed out of the chamber, their whispers fading into the marble hallways, I stood still for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. The echoes of laughter that once haunted me in this family were gone, replaced by the quiet authority of my own voice, my own choices. Michael remained hunched in his chair, broken, while Patricia lingered beside him, her eyes hollow and searching for a power that no longer existed. I did not stay to comfort them, because I had learned that true strength was not in mending what others had destroyed, but in building what they could never touch. I walked out of the building, the late afternoon sun spilling across the steps, warm and liberating, each stride lighter than the last. For the first time in my life, I felt unchained, not from my family's legacy, but from their grip on my worth. My father's belief in me had not been misplaced, and his decision had given me both justice and freedom. Yet even beyond the inheritance and the empire, what I carried most was the certainty that I no longer needed their validation to define me. I remembered being a teenager hunched over an old laptop typing lines of code, while Michael sneered that I was wasting my time. That memory stung once, but now it was fuel, a reminder that every insult, every dismissal had built the fire that carried me here. I would build the Bennett Foundation, I would grow Novatech, and I would live on my terms a life forged not from their acceptance, but from my resilience. Betrayal had been my prison, but now empowerment was my release. To anyone listening to my story, know this. Your worth is not defined by the voices that dismiss you, but by the choices you make when you finally decide to rise. I rose today, and I will keep rising higher than they ever imagined. And now I want to hear from you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from, because no matter the distance, our stories connect us, our resilience binds us, and together we prove that even in the face of betrayal, we can choose freedom. We can choose strength, and we can choose ourselves. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded of their own strength, because sometimes all it takes is one story to change how we see ourselves forever.